What if a billionaire tycoon, black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, challenged a quiet janitor to a friendly spar, only to discover that this unassuming man would one day save his daughter's life? This isn't just a story about skill on the mats. It's about trust, redemption, and the moments that change everything. If you believe in stories where strength isn't just measured in muscle, but in heart and courage, make sure you subscribe. That way, you won't miss the moments that stay with you long after the story ends. The sound of leather gloves striking padded mats echoed across the expansive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu studio. Floor-to-ceiling windows poured golden morning light onto the spotless training area. Around the edges, a group of high-profile guests and senior employees stood chatting in muted tones, sipping espresso in paper-thin porcelain cups. The place smelled of cedar from the polished floors, faintly mixed with the tang of disinfectant. Kenneth Lockwood, billionaire investor and BJJ black belt, was in his element. Barefoot in his crisp white GI, black belt tied with practiced precision, he moved through warm-up drills like a man used to commanding both boardrooms and training mats. His presence carried the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of winning. Then, as he finished demonstrating a sweep to his guests, his gaze drifted toward a man in faded work boots, kneeling in the corner of the room. The man was mopping the floor, head slightly bent, brown hair streaked with early gray falling over his forehead. His name tag read, Michael Harris. Kenneth tilted his chin toward him, a hint of a smile forming. He raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, you. Come here a second. Let's have some fun." The room reacted instantly. A ripple of laughter, some amused glances, a few people whispering. A billionaire black belt calling out the maintenance guy for a friendly spar was unexpected entertainment. No one believed it would be an even match. Michael paused mid-swipe of the mop. His posture straightened, but his expression stayed unreadable. He glanced once at the crowd, then at Kenneth. For a moment, he seemed as if he might decline. Then, from near the doorway, a small voice called out, "Go on, Dad." Lucas, his 10-year-old son, stood there with his backpack still slung over one shoulder. The boy's eyes sparkled with a mix of pride and curiosity. Michael looked at his son, then set the mop carefully against the wall. Without a word, he walked barefoot to the edge of the mat. The laughter quieted. People leaned in slightly. Kenneth gestured to one of his assistants to bring an extra GI. Michael shook his head. "No need." Kenneth grinned. "Suit yourself." He stepped forward, bowing lightly as tradition demanded. Michael mirrored the bow. The first few seconds were a test of presence. Kenneth's stance was solid, confident, honed from years of competition. Michael's was relaxed, almost casual, but there was a subtle balance in the way his feet rested on the mat, the way his shoulders stayed loose. Kenneth made the first move, a probing grip at Michael's sleeve, then a quick pull intended to unbalance him. Michael didn't resist. He shifted his weight, letting the movement flow past him like water. A faint crease appeared between Kenneth's brows. The second attempt came faster, a foot sweep aimed at catching Michael off guard. This time, Michael's right leg slipped back a fraction, the sweep missing entirely. He answered with a gentle redirect of Kenneth's arm, guiding rather than forcing. The crowd's amusement began to fade into silence. They could see it now. This wasn't luck. This was skill. Kenneth pressed harder, launching into a hip throw. For a heartbeat, Michael was lifted, but instead of crashing down, his body rotated midair, his foot finding the mat as he reversed the motion. In one fluid shift, Kenneth's balance broke. Michael's left arm found its mark, his hips pivoted, and Kenneth found himself on the ground with surprising softness. The technique so clean, it almost looked rehearsed. Michael didn't hold the position or gloat. He simply stepped back, offering a hand. Kenneth hesitated, then took it. His breathing was steady. but the flicker in his eyes revealed more than he intended. Surprise, respect, and something else he wouldn't name. From the corner, Lucas clapped once, then grinned wide. Sophia Lockwood had been leaning against the mirrored wall, arms crossed. At 19, she carried the poise of someone raised in wealth, but the wariness of someone who had seen her share of shadows. She hadn't smiled much in recent months, but now her eyes narrowed in curiosity. The man who had just taken her father down without aggression or arrogance didn't fit into any category she knew. The studio stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Kenneth turned to his guests with a laugh that felt just a touch too loud. "Well, that was interesting." The guests clapped politely, the tension diffusing, but the energy in the room had shifted. Something had passed between the two men that went deeper than a casual spar. Michael gave a polite nod, turned, and walked back to his mop. His pace was unhurried, his expression calm. Lucas followed him out, throwing one last glance over his shoulder at the room full of people still whispering. Kenneth watched them go, his hands on his hips. He could not quite place why this moment unsettled him. He was used to winning, or at least controlling the narrative. Today, in front of everyone, control had slipped, yet it hadn't felt like a loss in the usual way. And somewhere behind the composed mask of the billionaire, a single thought took root. Who exactly was Michael Harris? The answer, though no one knew it yet, would unravel in the days to come. And before long, the quiet man with the mop would be the one standing between Kenneth's daughter and the danger closing in on her life. From the outside, Kenneth Lockwood looked as composed as ever. His handshake was still firm as he bid farewell to the last of his guests, his voice carrying that practiced warmth he used for boardrooms and charity galas alike. But behind the mask, his chest was tight. The echo of the takedown replayed in his mind, not the physical fall, but the way it had happened. Clean, efficient, almost graceful. Kenneth was not used to losing, not in business, not on the mats, and certainly not in front of his daughter. Sophia lingered near the hallway that led out of the studio, one hand brushing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. She had seen every second of it. The room's collective gasp when Michael had reversed her father's throw still lingered in her mind. There had been no arrogance in the man's face, just calm certainty, the kind that doesn't come from books or videos. By the time Kenneth reached the locker room, some of his senior employees were already dissecting the match in hushed tones. "I mean, come on. He's pushing 60, one of them murmured. "It's no shame losing to a younger guy." "Yeah, but that wasn't just younger versus older," another replied. "That janitor knew exactly what he was doing. Did you see the footwork?" The conversation didn't stop there. As more employees joined in, the undercurrent of opinions began to split into quiet factions. Some defended Kenneth's pride, chalking the spar up to an inevitable result of age and wear. Others couldn't hide their admiration for Michael, whispering about the precision of his movements. By the next morning, that quiet split had become an unspoken divide in the company. In the corner offices, those closest to Kenneth dismissed the whole thing as a light-hearted stunt gone wrong. On the lower floors, in the break rooms and maintenance corridors, a different story spread. About the janitor who'd humbled the boss without malice, about the skill you couldn't fake. Sophia didn't think much of the rumors until later that day, when she crossed the marble atrium on her way out and spotted Lucas. The boy was sitting on the edge of a planter, swinging his legs, a lunch bag beside him. "You were at the gym this morning," she said, her voice carrying a hint of curiosity more than accusation. Lucas looked up, startled for a moment, then nodded. "That was my dad." Sophia tilted her head. "He's good." Lucas's grin was small but proud. "He taught me some stuff too. Before..." He hesitated, glancing toward the elevator where Michael was pushing a cleaning cart into the service corridor. "Before we moved here, He taught classes. Back when he was... He trailed off, unsure if he should say more. Something in his pause made her want to press further. Back when he was what? The boy shrugged, not out of defiance, but from the weight of deciding what to share. Back when things were different. Sophia didn't miss the way his eyes followed his father until the man disappeared behind the closing service door. She also didn't miss the quiet pride in his voice. That evening, over dinner at the Lockwood estate, Kenneth tried to act as if the day had been nothing but routine. He spoke about an acquisition deal, a charity event, the usual dance of controlled conversation. But Sophia caught the way his fork paused mid-air when she mentioned Lucas. "The janitor's kid?" Kenneth asked, his tone casual but eyes sharp. "He said his dad used to teach martial arts," Sophia replied, watching her father carefully. Kenneth's jaw tightened just enough for her to notice. A lot of people used to teach something. Doesn't mean they can still do it. There was a silence between them then, one of those moments where words could turn sharp if pushed. Sophia let it pass, but the image of Michael's calm face during the spar stayed with her. 2 days later, the company gym was busier than usual. Kenneth had scheduled an informal open mat session, something he hadn't done in years. The whispers started again. Was this a rematch in disguise? Was Kenneth trying to reclaim his image? Michael didn't attend. He stayed on his shift, repairing a faulty door hinge in one of the executive conference rooms. But he could feel the shift in the air. A pair of junior employees passed him in the hallway, talking just loudly enough. "Guy should have known better than to go hard on the boss," one said. "He didn't go hard. He was controlled," the other replied. "You don't know the difference." Michael didn't look up from his work, but his jaw flexed. He hadn't wanted this. He had only accepted the spar because of Lucas's encouragement, and because he believed in meeting challenges with quiet dignity. Now his name, whispered or not, was becoming part of a company-wide conversation. That night, as he walked home with Lucas, the boy spoke without looking up. "Dad, people are talking about you at school. Someone's parents saw the match." Michael sighed. "What are they saying?" Lucas hesitated. "Some think you embarrassed Mr. Lockwood on purpose. Some think you're, like, a secret champion or something." Michael stopped walking. The street lamp cast a warm pool of light over them. "Lucas, you know the truth. That's enough. Let people think what they want. You can't control what they believe." But deep down, Michael knew that the ripples from that morning on the mat were spreading faster than he expected. And somewhere at the center of those ripples was Kenneth Lockwood, still smiling for the cameras, but quietly unsettled, and perhaps just beginning to suspect that the man with the mop was far more than he seemed. Kenneth Lockwood didn't make a habit of prying into the lives of his employees. Normally, if someone showed up on time, did their job, and stayed clear of trouble, that was enough. But Michael Harris was not normally anything. The man had walked into his company as a janitor, and, in less than 5 minutes on a training mat, knocked a crack into Kenneth's carefully built public image. So the following Monday, Kenneth called his head of human resources into his office. "I want everything you have on Michael Harris," he said, his voice even, almost casual, though his eyes told a different story. An hour later, a manila folder landed on his desk. It was thinner than he expected. Name, date of birth, home address. Work history. Fragmented. References. Sparse. No social media presence worth noting. No photos except the ID badge picture. It was almost empty. Too empty. Kenneth flipped through each page, expecting something to catch his eye. Then, on the third page, a small note in the additional background section stopped him cold. Former U.S. Army combat instructor. Service record sealed. He sat back in his chair, tapping the page with one finger. The military could be tight-lipped, but sealed meant something more than routine confidentiality. It meant there was a story, Likely one nobody wanted told. Dig deeper, Kenneth told HR. Look for unofficial channels. That afternoon, a quiet call went out to an old friend of Kenneth's, a retired colonel. 2 days later, a discreet envelope arrived, slipped under Kenneth's office door. No return address. Inside, a single, grainy photocopy of a training incident report, dated 12 years ago. It told the story of a live combat simulation gone wrong. A trainee had suffered a catastrophic spinal injury after a close-quarters maneuver. The report named the instructor on duty that day, Staff Sergeant Michael Harris. Kenneth's jaw tightened as his eyes reached the injured soldier's name, Lieutenant Evan Cole. He knew that name well. Evan had been one of his most promising private students in his early jiu-jitsu days, a young man with boundless energy and an easy laugh. Kenneth had lost touch with him after Evan joined the Army, but word had eventually reached him that Evan was paralyzed from the waist down. For years, Kenneth had assumed it was an enemy encounter, something in a war zone. Now, staring at the black and white words, he knew the truth, or at least the official version of it. Kenneth closed the file slowly. He had wanted an explanation for Michael's skill. He had found something darker instead. And yet, there was no malice in the report. It read like a chain of bad decisions, bad timing, and the kind of risk that comes with teaching real combat. Still, the damage had been permanent. Meanwhile, away from the boardrooms and sealed files, another story was quietly unfolding. Sophia had been walking through the company gardens, a place she rarely visited anymore, when she saw Lucas sitting cross-legged by the koi pond, tossing crumbs to the fish. She hesitated before walking over, her footsteps soft on the stone path. "You're feeding them bread?" she asked. Lucas looked up, startled, then grinned sheepishly. "Don't tell anyone. I think it's against the rules." For the first time in months, Sophia felt the corners of her mouth lift into something resembling a smile. "Your secret's safe with me." She sat down beside him, knees drawn up. The water rippled with orange and white shapes darting beneath the surface. "My mom used to take me fishing," Lucas said after a while, "before she, passed." Sophia glanced at him, sensing the shift in his tone. "I'm sorry." Lucas shrugged, the way kids do when they've carried something heavy for too long. "Dad says we don't have to talk about it all the time. But sometimes it's nice." She nodded. "Yeah, sometimes it is." There was a pause, comfortable in its own way, before Lucas looked at her more closely. "You don't smile a lot, do you?" Sophia blinked. "What makes you say that?" "You smiled just now," he said matter-of-factly. "But it's like you're not used to it. Like your face forgot how." She let out a small, surprised laugh. Maybe it did. She didn't tell him about the nights when she woke up gasping, the moments in crowded rooms when her chest tightened, and the world seemed too loud, too fast. She didn't explain that since the accident, since the one mission that still replayed in her head. She had been living in a world wrapped in glass. She could see life happening, but she couldn't quite touch it. And yet here was this boy, unfiltered and kind, breaking through that glass without even trying. They spent another half hour by the pond, trading stories that were small on the surface, but heavy in their own ways. When Lucas's phone buzzed with a message from his father, he stood, brushing crumbs from his hands. "See you around, Sophia," he said, his tone certain, as if it were a promise. "See you," she replied. And for the first time in months, she realized she meant it. Back in his office, Kenneth stared out the window at the city skyline, the sealed file still open on his desk. The sun was setting, casting the glass towers in a deep orange glow. He had thought of Michael as a challenge to overcome, a bruise to his ego that needed covering. Now he wasn't so sure, because buried in that thin, incomplete file was a truth Kenneth couldn't ignore. Michael Harris had once been responsible for someone Kenneth had cared about. And if the past had taught Kenneth anything, it was that echoes have a way of finding you, whether you're ready to hear them or not. The late afternoon light filtered through the glass atrium of Valencia Sports Complex, casting warm gold across the polished tile floors. The hum of treadmills and the muffled thuds of heavy bags in the distance filled the air. Sophia Lockwood was walking through the equipment storage corridor, scrolling on her phone, her headphones hanging loose around her neck. Above her, a maintenance platform shuddered. One of the steel brackets holding a weight rack in place had been loosened earlier during repairs, its fastenings only half secured. A careless jolt from a technician finishing his shift sent a 40-pound resistance bar teetering toward the edge. It happened in a heartbeat. The bar slipped free, gravity pulling it straight toward her head. Before she even registered the shadow falling across her, a strong arm hooked around her waist and yanked her sideways. Her phone clattered to the floor as her back met the solid wall of someone's chest. The bar crashed against the tiles with a sharp, ringing clang, rolling to a stop inches from her shoes. Her heart was hammering. She looked up, startled, to find Michael Harris standing over her, his breathing steady, his eyes calm but alert. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Sophia nodded, still catching her breath. I think so." He released her gently, stepping back to create space. Around them, a few bystanders muttered in surprise, the scene already drawing whispers. From across the corridor, Kenneth Lockwood had seen the whole thing. He had been speaking with a facilities manager when the bar fell, and had watched Michael move with a speed and precision that was almost unnatural. No hesitation, no panic, just instinct and control. For a moment, Kenneth's jaw tightened, not in gratitude, but in recognition. That kind of reflex didn't come from cleaning floors. It came from years of training, the kind forged in situations where hesitation could cost a life. As Sophia steadied herself, Kenneth approached, his expression composed, his voice measured. "Everything all right?" She turned to him, still a little shaken. "Dad, Michael pulled me out of the way. That thing could have—" "I saw," Kenneth cut in, his tone clipped. His eyes flicked to Michael, studying him, then gave the smallest nod. "Good reflexes." It was as close to "thank you" as Kenneth would allow. Michael simply nodded back. "Just doing my job." With that, he stepped aside, retrieving the bar from the floor and setting it against the wall for repair. He didn't linger, didn't wait for more conversation, and certainly didn't use the moment to win points. In a few seconds, he had disappeared into the maze of storage rooms, leaving Sophia standing there, her pulse still unsteady. That night, over dinner at the Lockwood penthouse, Sophia found herself replaying the moment. Not the bar falling, but the way Michael's hand had closed around her arm, firm yet careful, and the strange calm she'd felt despite the sudden danger. For months, she had felt jumpy around everyone. Loud noises made her tense. Crowded rooms left her scanning for exits. But in that instant, pressed against the rough fabric of a janitor's uniform, she had felt safe. The next afternoon, she found herself by the koi pond again. Lucas was there, crouched over the water, his hands cupped as if trying to scoop a reflection. "Hey," she said, lowering herself onto the bench beside him. "Hey," he replied with a smile. She hesitated, then asked, "Your dad. He's done this kind of thing before, hasn't he?" Lucas looked up, curious. "What do you mean?" "The way he moved yesterday," she explained. "It wasn't normal. It was like he knew exactly what was going to happen before it did." Lucas grinned faintly, as if proud but unsure how much to say. "Dad used to teach people how to fight, not just like boxing or karate, the real stuff. Military? She guessed. He nodded. Yeah, but he doesn't really talk about it. Says the past is complicated. Sophia studied Lucas's face. He saved me yesterday. I didn't even see it coming. Lucas shrugged. That's just him. He's always been like that, quiet but watching everything. He can be halfway across a room and still know if you're about to trip. There was something in Lucas's tone. Pride, yes, but also a quiet respect that made Sophia curious in a way she hadn't been for a long time. I'd like to thank him, she said. Lucas chuckled. Good luck with that. He's not big on attention. In the days that followed, Sophia began noticing Michael in the background, fixing a loose railing in the gym, carrying a toolbox through the halls, testing the fire doors without a word. He never sought her out, but he didn't avoid her either. Still, whenever Kenneth was nearby, Michael kept a careful distance, as if aware that the air between them was charged with something unsaid. Kenneth, for his part, maintained his cool detachment. In board meetings and on the training mat, he carried himself as if the incident had never happened. But sometimes, just sometimes, his eyes would follow Michael a second too long, as though weighing something he hadn't yet decided. To the rest of the staff, the falling bar was just a freak accident, quickly forgotten. But to Sophia, it was the first crack in the wall she'd built between herself and the world, a moment when fear had been replaced, however briefly, by trust. And she couldn't shake the feeling that Michael Harris, the quiet janitor who moved like a soldier, was not at all who he seemed. The invitation came in the form of a terse message from the front desk. Mr. Lockwood requests your presence in the executive suite. Now. Michael Harris stood outside the frosted glass door, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the corridor. He'd been summoned before by supervisors, but never by the man himself. Behind this door was not just Kenneth Lockwood the billionaire, but the man whose sharp eyes had been dissecting him since the moment they met. He knocked once, heard a clipped, "Come in," and stepped inside. The office was a study in power, polished mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling windows with the city sprawling below, and a single-framed photograph of a younger Kenneth on a tournament podium, a medal hanging from his neck. Kenneth didn't stand. He gestured to the chair opposite him. Sit. Michael remained standing. You wanted to see me. Kenneth's jaw shifted, just enough to show annoyance. 12 years ago. Fort Bragg Training Facility. Advanced Combatives course. An accident left one of my students paralyzed from the waist down. Ring any bells? Michael's gaze didn't waver. It wasn't an accident. The air between them tightened. Kenneth's eyes narrowed. Then you admit you were involved. Michael exhaled slowly, as though letting out a weight he'd carried for years. I was there. I made the call I thought would keep him alive. I was wrong, and I've lived with it every day since. Lived with it, Kenneth repeated, his voice a blade. Do you know how many surgeries he's had? How many nights I sat with him in the hospital? He wasn't just a student. He was like a brother to me. Michael's face remained unreadable, but there was a flicker. Guilt, perhaps, or pain, that passed through his eyes. I'm sorry, he said quietly, but I'm not here to defend myself to you. Kenneth rose from his chair. You'll stay away from my daughter. Whatever this. Friendship is that she's starting with you and your boy. It ends now. Am I clear? Michael's voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it. Sophia is an adult, and all I've done is pull her out of harm's way. That's all it takes, Kenneth snapped. A rescue, a few words, and before you know it, she's trusting the wrong man. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Michael broke it by turning toward the door. If that's all, I'll get back to work. Kenneth's final words followed him out like a shadow. Stay. Away. From. Her. Outside the office, down the hall and around the corner, Lucas Harris had been leaning against the wall, pretending to scroll through his phone. He had only meant to wait for his dad, maybe catch a ride home together. But when Kenneth's voice rose, the words carried. He'd heard enough to know. The man in that office had just dredged up the past his father never spoke about. The past that made Lucas learn to read his dad's silences. When Michael emerged, Lucas pushed off the wall, his face tight. "Why didn't you tell me?" Michael paused. "Tell you what?" "That you hurt someone. That you—" Lucas stopped, lowering his voice when a pair of employees passed. "That you're the reason some guy can't walk anymore." Michael's expression didn't change, but his shoulders seemed to bear a heavier load. "It's not that simple." Lucas shook his head, frustration flashing in his eyes. "You always say that. It's not that simple. You hide behind that, like if you don't tell me the whole story, you're protecting me. But maybe you're just protecting yourself." Michael's reply was quiet. "Maybe both." They stood in the corridor, a gulf between them that hadn't been there before. Lucas looked away first, his jaw tight. "You've always told me to face things head on. Guess I'm wondering when you're going to take your own advice." Michael's hand twitched, as if he might reach out, but he let it fall. "We'll talk about this later." Lucas gave a short, bitter laugh. "Sure, later. Like always." He walked away before Michael could answer, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. That night, the city skyline outside Michael's apartment was dotted with pinpricks of light. Inside, he sat at the kitchen table long after Lucas had shut his bedroom door. He stared at his hands, scarred, strong, and marked by choices he couldn't undo. He could still see Kenneth's face across that desk, could still hear the restrained venom in his voice, and beneath it, the unspoken truth. Both men carried a ghost from that day 12 years ago. One wore it as a wound that never healed, the other as a chain around his neck. Somewhere down the hall, a door clicked shut. Michael knew Lucas was angry, and he hated the distance between them. But until he found the right words, and maybe the courage, to tell his son everything, the fracture would remain. And in the world of Kenneth Lockwood, fractures were fault lines, and fault lines, if pushed too far, always broke. The argument began the way most of their arguments did, over something small. Kenneth had called Sophia twice that morning. She hadn't answered. By the time she walked into the kitchen, the coffee in his cup had gone cold, and so had his patience. "You can't just disappear," he said, setting the cup down harder than necessary. "I went for a walk," she replied, pulling a bottle of water from the fridge. Her voice was calm, but her grip on the bottle cap was tight. "A walk where? Alone?" "Yes, alone. I'm 19, Dad, not 9. Kenneth's jaw flexed. "You know why I ask. After what happened, you can't just—" "After what happened, I can't breathe without you checking the air first," Sophia cut in. She set the bottle on the counter and looked him in the eye. "Do you realize you haven't trusted me to go anywhere without you or one of your assistants in months?" "That's called protecting you," he said. "That's called controlling me," she countered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with frustration. "And it's making it worse." Kenneth frowned. "Making what worse?" "My head. My chest. The nights I can't sleep because I feel like I'm still trapped in that moment. Every time you watch me like I'm about to break, it reminds me that maybe I already have." Her words landed like a blow he hadn't trained for. Kenneth opened his mouth, but no words came. He wasn't used to being caught off guard, especially by his own daughter. "I'm tired, Dad," Sophia said quietly. "Tired of being afraid, and tired of you making the decisions because you think I can't." She grabbed her bag and walked out, leaving Kenneth alone with the echo of her footsteps and the bitter taste of helplessness. That afternoon, the training room was quieter than usual. Most of the gym's members had already left for the day. Lucas Harris stood by the padded mats, tossing a small foam ball from hand to hand. "You ever tried these?" he asked, as Sophia walked in, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. She shook her head. "My dad had me do some self-defense once. It was more about him showing off than teaching me." Lucas grinned, not unkindly. "Well, I'm not your dad, and I'm not going to throw you across the mat, unless you ask." Sophia laughed, an actual laugh, light and sudden. "What are we doing then?" "Basics," Lucas said, stepping onto the mat. "Stuff you can remember if you're scared. Stuff that makes you feel like you're not just standing there." He showed her how to plant her feet, how to keep her hands up, how to twist her hips when she pushed someone away. She moved awkwardly at first, but after a few tries, there was a spark in her movements. "Better," Lucas said, tossing the foam ball to her. "Now, throw it at me. Hard." She did. He caught it and threw it back faster. Soon they were moving, dodging, laughing, the ball bouncing against the mats and walls. For a moment, Sophia wasn't the girl defined by her trauma. She was just a young woman learning to move again, to take space in the world without asking permission. "You've got a good grip," Lucas said as they stopped to catch their breath. "You keep practicing. You'll surprise people." Sophia smiled. "I think I just surprised myself." Later that evening, Kenneth stood outside the glass wall of the training room, unnoticed. He had come looking for Sophia after realizing she hadn't answered his calls again. What he found was his daughter, flushed and smiling, tossing a foam ball at the son of the man he'd just ordered to stay away from her. His first instinct was to march in, pull her out, and lecture her about boundaries. But something in the way she moved stopped him. The way she stood straighter, the way she didn't glance over her shoulder. He didn't know that Lucas's patient coaching had chipped away at the invisible wall Sophia had been living behind. He didn't know that each small motion, a steady stance, a sure throw, was helping her reclaim pieces of herself she thought she'd lost. Kenneth only knew that he hadn't seen her look like that in a long time. Still, he walked away before she could see him, the knot in his chest pulling tighter. That night, Sophia lay in bed, replaying the afternoon. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something bad to happen. She was still scared, yes, but the fear wasn't sitting on her chest like a weight she couldn't lift. Maybe, she thought, she could be more than what had happened to her. And maybe, though she didn't dare say it out loud, that freedom wouldn't come from her father's protection, but from her own strength. Across the city, Kenneth sat in his home office, the room dark except for the glow of his laptop screen. He typed a message to Sophia, something simple. "Dinner tomorrow? Just us," and hovered over the send button. He deleted it instead. For all his wealth, all his influence, Kenneth Lockwood had no idea how to bridge the growing distance between himself and his daughter. And he didn't know that, while he hesitated, someone else was already giving her the tools to stand without him. The Lockwood atrium had never looked more opulent. Crystal chandeliers bathed the marble floors in warm light. A string quartet played in the corner, their music drifting over the low hum of conversation. Kenneth's annual charity gala was as much a statement of power as it was philanthropy. Every influential name in the city was here. Michael had no interest in the champagne or the networking. He was stationed near the far wall, keeping a discreet eye on the guests, a silent presence in a tailored suit Kenneth had insisted he wear for the night. He moved like a man invisible, his focus constantly shifting. Then, a flicker. Across the crowd, half hidden behind a column, a man in a dark suit lingered too long in the shadows. His posture was casual, but his eyes, those eyes weren't mingling. They were scanning, searching, fixing. Michael froze for half a breath. He knew that face. Older now, a little more lined, but unmistakable. The man had been in the files he'd reviewed years ago, a person of interest in the attempted abduction of Sophia. The case had gone cold, and the suspect had vanished. Until tonight, Michael's pulse steadied instead of racing. He adjusted his stance just enough to keep the man in sight while blending into the flow of the gala. The suspect's gaze shifted and landed on Sophia. She was across the room, radiant in a pale blue gown, her hair swept back. A polite smile fixed in place as she spoke to one of her father's business partners. But Michael saw what others didn't, the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her clutch, a small tick that came out when she felt trapped. Then, in the span of a few seconds, she was gone. Michael's body moved before his mind caught up. He slipped between groups of guests, excusing himself with nods and murmured apologies, eyes tracking the path she must have taken. Near the west exit, he caught a glimpse of the hem of her dress disappearing around a corner. The suspect was no longer in sight. Michael followed. The air cooled as he left the sizzle of the gala behind, the soft music replaced by the distant hum of machinery. The service corridors were dim, lit only by flickering overhead bulbs. He kept his footsteps silent, ears straining for sound. A faint echo of heels, quick, uneven. He turned a corner and saw her. Sophia was halfway down the corridor, her back to him, standing at the open doorway of a storage room. Inside, the light was weak, a single bulb swinging slowly, casting moving shadows over stacks of crates. "Sophia," Michael called softly. She startled, spinning toward him. "Michael! What are you?" Her voice caught. Behind her, a shadow moved. Michael closed the distance in 3 strides, his hand on her arm as he stepped past her into the doorway. The man from the gala was inside, leaning casually against a crate, as though this were a social call. But his eyes gave him away. They were sharp, cold, and locked on Sophia. "Evening," the man said, his voice carrying a lazy menace. "Didn't mean to interrupt." Michael positioned himself between the man and Sophia without breaking eye contact. "You're not on the guest list." The man's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "Guess you could say I invited myself." Sophia's breathing quickened behind him. Michael could feel it, her fight-or-flight instinct teetering. He kept his tone level, controlled. "You should leave," he said. "Or what?" The man straightened, his hands visible but loose at his sides. "You'll throw me out in front of the donors? Make a scene?" Michael took a slow step forward. "If you think I care about a scene, you haven't done your homework." For a moment, the air between them tightened. Then the man laughed, short, dry, and utterly humorless. "This isn't over," he murmured, brushing past Michael with calculated nonchalance. Michael didn't move until the man's footsteps faded down the corridor. When he turned back, Sophia was pressed against the wall, her eyes wide but focused on him. "What was that?" she asked, her voice a mix of fear and confusion. "Someone who shouldn't be here," Michael said. He glanced toward the door the man had left through. "We need to get you back to the main hall. Now." She hesitated. "Michael, you knew him." "Not the way you think," he replied, his tone making it clear he wouldn't say more. But as they walked back toward the light and noise of the gala, Michael's mind was already moving. The shadows of the past had just stepped back into their lives, and he knew this was only the beginning. And somewhere in the crowd, Kenneth was shaking hands and smiling for photographs, unaware that danger had just walked through his front door. The corridor outside the storage room was silent, except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. Michael had just guided Sophia back toward the brighter service hall when a tall figure stepped from a side doorway, blocking their path. The man was broad-shouldered, with the compact build of someone who had trained, not in a gym for show, but for use. His eyes flicked briefly to Sophia, then locked on Michael. "You," the man said, his voice flat, heavy with something more than hostility. Michael shifted his stance, not aggressive, but ready. "Do I know you?" "You should." The man stepped forward. "You're the reason my cousin can't walk." Sophia froze, her hand tightening around her clutch. Michael didn't take his eyes off the stranger. "I don't want trouble," Michael said quietly. "Let her pass, and we can talk." The man's mouth twisted into a humorless grin. "Not until I've taken something from you, like you took from him." He moved fast, lunging with a looping right hook aimed at Michael's head. Michael didn't retreat. He stepped in. One arm rose to deflect the punch, the other hooked under the attacker's elbow. In a single fluid motion, Michael pivoted, dropping his weight, pulling the man off balance. The stranger's momentum carried him forward, and Michael used it, sweeping a leg behind the man's knee, rotating his hips. Before the man could register what had happened, he was on the floor, pinned on his side, Michael's knee pressing gently but firmly into his midsection. "Don't fight it," Michael said evenly. "You'll only hurt yourself." The man strained against the hold, but Michael had chosen his grips carefully. One arm securing the wrist, the other locking the shoulder, controlling the body without wrenching it. This wasn't about punishment. It was about containment. Sophia watched, her breathing tight, eyes darting between them. "You could break my arm right now," the man hissed. "Oh, I could," Michael agreed, "but I'm not going to." For a long moment, the only sound was the low rumble of the ventilation. Then Michael eased the pressure just enough for the man to breathe more freely. "I tried to save him," Michael said, his voice lower now, meant for the man alone. "Your cousin. The accident wasn't what you think." The man went still. "Liar." "No," Michael said, holding the man's gaze. He made a move he wasn't ready for. Too much torque on the spine. I was already moving in to catch him, but his momentum, it was too fast. By the time I locked the fall, the damage was done. I carried him to the medics myself. The man's jaw clenched, his anger fraying at the edges. "That's not what I was told." "You were told I crippled him," Michael said. "And you believed it because it gave you someone to hate." Silence stretched between them. Finally, the man's shoulders sagged. He always said he was ready," the man muttered. "That he'd been training for that throw for months." Michael shook his head. He was talented, brave, but in that moment, he was just human. And humans make mistakes. The man's breathing slowed. The fight had drained from him, replaced by something heavier. Confusion, maybe even shame. Michael released the hold and stood, then offered a hand. The man hesitated, then took it, pulling himself up. "You could have hurt me bad just now," the man said. "But I didn't," Michael replied, "because hurting you wouldn't fix anything." The man glanced at Sophia, who had been silent the whole time, her eyes wide but steady. "You protected her," he said quietly, "without trying to win." "It's not about winning," Michael said. "It's about ending it before it becomes something worse." A beat passed. Then the man stepped aside. "I guess I owe you an apology. For tonight. And for believing the worst all these years." Michael gave a faint nod. "Take care of your cousin. That's what matters now." The man left without another word, disappearing into the dim hall. Sophia exhaled slowly. "Michael, what just happened?" He glanced at her, his voice softer now. "Just a misunderstanding. One that's been waiting too long to be cleared up." She searched his face for a moment, then gave the smallest of smiles. "You didn't even hurt him." "That's not how you win fights, Sophia," he said. "You win by making sure everyone walks away." They walked back toward the glow of the gala, the sound of music growing louder with each step. But Michael knew this night had shifted something, not just in the man who'd confronted him, But in Sophia's eyes, how she looked at him now, with a mix of gratitude and something quieter, harder to name. And somewhere in the crowd ahead, Kenneth was still shaking hands, still smiling for cameras, still unaware of just how close danger had brushed past his daughter again. The gala's music pulsed faintly through the concrete walls, a distant echo of laughter and clinking glasses. Here, in the quiet shadow of the service hallway, Kenneth stood frozen, half hidden in the doorway. He had arrived just in time to hear the stranger's final words, his admission that Michael had tried to save the man's cousin, not cripple him. But it wasn't that truth which locked Kenneth in place, it was the sight of his daughter. Sophia was pressed close to Michael's side, her arms wrapped around him in a rare, instinctive gesture. She wasn't trembling, she wasn't shrinking away. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady. The picture of a young woman who, for the first time in years, felt safe without her father standing between her and the world. Something in Kenneth's chest twisted sharply. He had poured resources, security details, therapy sessions into protecting her. And yet here she was, leaning on a man who until a few weeks ago had been just another name on the payroll. Michael glanced over Sophia's head and met Kenneth's eyes. There was no challenge there, no smugness, just a quiet steadiness, as if he'd known Kenneth was watching the whole time. Kenneth cleared his throat. "Sophia," he said, his voice low but firm. She turned, startled, but didn't immediately step away from Michael. That alone sent another ripple through him. "Dad, Kenneth raised a hand. "It's all right." His gaze shifted back to Michael. "Can we talk?" "Alone." Michael gave Sophia a small nod, and she hesitated before releasing him. Her eyes searched both men's faces, sensing the weight in the air. Then she slipped away toward the brighter hall, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The silence between them stretched. "You heard all of it?" Michael asked finally. "Every word," Kenneth said. He stepped closer, his posture still formal but lacking its usual sharp edge. "I also saw how she looked at you." Michael said nothing. Kenneth drew in a breath, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I misjudged you. I let the past, stories I thought were truth, shape how I saw you. And in doing so, I let my pride come before my daughter's healing." The older man's tone shifted, quieter now. "You did something I couldn't. She trusts you. I've been trying for years to get her to step out of the shadows of her fear, and tonight I watched her walk into them, because you were there." Michael leaned against the wall, his eyes steady. "It's not about me, Kenneth. She did that herself. I just happened to be the one standing close enough when she needed someone." Kenneth studied him for a long moment. "Still, you protected her without making her feel like she was fragile. I've been protecting her like she might shatter at any second." Michael's jaw tightened, and he looked away briefly. "I know what it's like to live with something you can't undo, to wake up every day with the same weight in your chest. Saving her. Maybe that's my way of trying to save myself too." The confession hung in the air, quiet but heavy. Kenneth nodded slowly, absorbing it. "I owe you an apology. Not just for tonight, but for every time I treated you like you didn't belong here. You've proven otherwise." Michael gave a faint, almost self-deprecating smile. "Apology accepted. But you should know, I wasn't looking for your approval. I was just doing what anyone should do." Kenneth allowed himself a small, genuine smile, the kind that didn't come easily to him. "Anyone? I'm not sure just anyone would have done what you did tonight." For the first time, there was no tension in their eye contact, just a quiet acknowledgement that some bridge, however narrow, had been built. From the far end of the hall, Sophia's voice called softly, "Dad? Michael?" Kenneth glanced in her direction, then back at Michael. She's different tonight. Lighter. You did that. Michael shook his head. No, she did that. I just stood beside her while she found it. Kenneth exhaled slowly, as though letting go of something he'd been gripping for years. Maybe that's all any of us can really do. The two men walked back toward the main hall, not side by side exactly, but not at odds anymore either. The distance between them had shifted, still there, but smaller now. As they reached the edge of the crowd, Sophia turned toward them, her smile hesitant, but genuine. For a moment, the noise of the gala faded, and Kenneth saw something he hadn't seen in her eyes in years. Hope. And for Michael, standing in the glow of the chandeliers with Kenneth beside him and Sophia, watching from just a few steps away, that hope felt like the closest thing to redemption he'd ever known. The winter light poured into the training hall in long, golden shafts, catching dust motes that drifted lazily through the air. The wide mats stretched from wall to wall, the faint scent of fresh vinyl mixing with the sharper tang of antiseptic cleaner. Kenneth stood near the entrance, hands in his pockets, watching the steady flow of teenagers shuffle in. Some wore nervous smiles, others bounced on their heels, eager for the class to begin. At the far end of the room, Michael was kneeling on the mat, showing two younger boys how to keep their balance. His movements were calm, deliberate, each step broken down with a patience that didn't rush or condescend. When Kenneth had approached Michael with the idea a week earlier, self-defense classes for local youth, he hadn't been sure the man would accept. It wasn't just about the skills, it was about giving the kids, especially those who'd been through rough experiences, a sense of agency. For Kenneth, it was also a way to bridge something. "Dad?" Sophia's voice pulled him back. He turned to see her standing by the door, Lucas beside her. She wore athletic leggings and a loose tee, her hair tied back, her expression a mix of reluctance and quiet determination. Lucas gave her a subtle thumbs up. "You sure you want to do this?" Kenneth asked gently. Sophia's eyes flickered, but her voice was steady. "Yes." When they stepped onto the mat, Michael looked up. His gaze rested on Sophia for a beat. No judgment, no pity, just a nod of acknowledgement. "Find a partner," he said to the group. Sophia ended up paired with Lucas. Kenneth watched from the sidelines as Michael demonstrated a simple wrist escape. The move was small but effective, a basic technique meant to teach leverage over brute force. Michael's voice carried just enough to be heard. It's not about overpowering someone. It's about knowing where the balance is and how to shift it in your favor. Sophia mimicked the motion slowly, her first attempt clumsy. Lucas offered encouragement, and Michael stopped by to adjust her stance. "Relax your shoulders. Breathe." On the next try, her wrist came free cleanly. Something flickered across her face, a flash of surprise, then a smile that was not the careful, polite kind Kenneth had seen her wear at business functions. This was warmer, freer. She glanced toward him instinctively. Kenneth met her eyes. There it was. Confidence. Not the brittle mask she'd worn for years, but something solid, something earned. For a moment, Kenneth felt an unfamiliar lump in his throat. He'd spent so long trying to shield her from the world, it hadn't occurred to him that what she needed was a way to stand in it on her own. Lucas, catching the glance between father and daughter, grinned knowingly. The boy had a knack for reading the air, an instinct he must have inherited from Michael. As the class moved on to a few more drills, Kenneth noticed the room's rhythm shift. Kids laughed when they stumbled, cheered each other on when someone nailed a move, and Michael, though quiet, had a way of making even the shyest participants feel seen. When it was over, Michael gathered the group. "Self-defense isn't just about fighting," he told them. "It's about being aware, making choices that keep you safe, and knowing that you have options." One by one, the students filed out, still buzzing from the session. Sophia lingered by Lucas, her cheeks flushed. "That felt good," she admitted. "You were great," Lucas said. "You didn't even need me." Kenneth stepped forward then, addressing them both. "Looks like we found ourselves a regular class member." His tone was light, but there was warmth in it. Sophia's gaze softened. "Maybe," she said, and then, after a pause, "Thanks for setting this up." Kenneth glanced toward Michael, who was rolling up the mats with an easy efficiency. "Don't thank me," Kenneth said. "He's the one making it work." Michael looked up at that, meeting Kenneth's eyes. For a moment, no words passed, just an acknowledgement, quiet and mutual, that something had shifted between them. As they left the hall, Lucas dropped back a few steps, letting Kenneth and Michael walk side by side. It wasn't exactly friendly yet, but it was no longer guarded. For Lucas, watching his father and Sophia's father share the same space without tension felt like witnessing a truce. For Kenneth, it was the first step toward trusting another man with his daughter's safety. And for Michael, it was the faint but unmistakable beginning of belonging somewhere again. By the time they reached the parking lot, the winter sun was dipping low, staining the horizon in shades of amber and rose. It seemed fitting. Bridges weren't built in a day, but sometimes all it took was one shared moment on level ground to lay the first stone. The park stretched out like a painting under the late afternoon sky. Golden light poured through the trees, spilling across a wide field where a blanket lay spread, its corners weighted down by a picnic basket and mismatched mugs. The air was crisp but gentle, carrying the scent of grass and distant barbecues from other families scattered along the hillside. Kenneth sat on a folding chair a few yards back from the blanket, the rim of his coffee cup warm in his hands. From here, he could see Sophia kneeling on the grass, her hair loose, sunlight catching in the strands like copper threads. Across from her, Michael knelt in mirrored posture, hands relaxed, but ready. Lucas sat off to the side, leaning back on his elbows with an easy grin. It was Sophia who had asked for this. No boardroom, no polished marble floors, just open air and the sound of birds in the distance. She had looked Michael in the eye that morning and said, "Will you show me that move again? The one you used that night." Now, she stepped forward, offering her wrist. Michael took it gently, his voice calm. "The key is not strength. It's knowing where the pressure is weakest." He demonstrated slowly, letting her feel the shift before she tried it herself. Sophia moved hesitantly at first, but then something clicked. Her wrist came free with a swift, clean motion. She looked up at him, surprised, then tried again. Faster this time, more certain. Kenneth found himself smiling. It was a small thing, perhaps, but to him it was monumental. For months he had seen her retreat behind guarded eyes, her laughter rationed, her trust scarce. Now she was leaning in, laughing when she missed a step, and looking at Michael as though she'd known him much longer than she had. Lucas tossed a grape into his mouth and called out, "Careful, Dad. She's getting better than you." Michael smirked without looking up. That's the goal. When they took a break, Sophia sat beside Michael on the blanket, catching her breath. "I used to think safety came from staying away from danger," she admitted. "Now I think maybe it's about knowing you can face it if you have to." Michael nodded. "It's both. There's wisdom in caution, but there's also power in not being afraid to live." Kenneth heard the words, and they landed somewhere deep. He had spent years trying to shield her from every risk, forgetting that life itself was full of them. Perhaps Michael's greatest gift wasn't the rescue. It was handing Sophia back her own agency. As the sun dipped lower, they unpacked the rest of the picnic. Sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, cold pasta salad, a jar of lemonade beating with condensation. Conversation drifted easily, moving from light teasing to shared stories. Even Kenneth joined in, telling an old fishing tale that made Lucas groan, and Sophia laughed so hard she had to put down her drink. Later, as the sky blushed pink and gold, Sophia asked Michael one more time to show her the move. She was quick now, fluid, her grip firm but not tense. When she succeeded, she looked at him expectantly, as if waiting for something unspoken. Michael met her gaze, and for a moment the world seemed to still. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes saving someone else is the only way to save yourself." The words hung in the air, simple, yet heavy with meaning. Kenneth felt them too. It wasn't just Sophia he had saved that night. It was a part of himself he'd thought was gone forever. The camera in this imagined scene would pull back slowly now, the four figures framed against the glowing horizon, their laughter faint but steady. The grass swayed in the evening breeze, the light softening as the day surrendered to night. They didn't speak of the past anymore. They didn't need to. Out here, under the fading sun, there was only the quiet promise of what could be rebuilt, not just between fathers and daughters, but between people who had learned that redemption was possible, even after the darkest chapters. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the trees, Michael looked out over the field, his voice almost lost to the wind. "It's a good day," he murmured. And for the first time in a long while, everyone there believed it. Before you go, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Your comments make this community feel like family. If today's story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you can join us for the next one. We share moments that remind us of kindness, hope, and the strength we all carry inside. Thank you for spending your time with us today. It truly means more than you know.